Today's date is 9/4/2022, and we have Mr. and Mrs Minton. They're living in Indianapolis right now. Mrs. Minton is an author about lots of events of World War II and interviews of individual warriors. She has several books out, a lot from warriors from Evansville. Now, Mr. Minton, he was from here, his family is from here. I want you to say your first name and where you went to grade school and high school. I'm going to interview Mr. Minton first, and then tell us about your parents.
Ray. I went to Delaware grade school, and then I went to Evansville North, and then I was in the first graduating class of the University of Evansville in 1967.
And so, what degree did you get from University of Evansville, Mr. Minton? What was your degree?
Oh, it was a education degree. I taught 5 years in Jasper, Indiana, and then I taught the rest of my career in Warren Township in Indianapolis.
So 1967 was the big year for basketball. Jerry Sloan was here, Buster Briley, Ed Zausch, Sam Watkins. So you got to witness a 26-0 and a 25-1 season.
Went to every home game, a few of the away games. Was in class with a few of the people. So it was fabulous. Yes.
Evansville was unbelievable at that time.
They were. We could beat anybody.
You could. They brought people didn't want to come here. You beat Purdue, you beat Notre Dame, you beat a lot of big ones. I'll tell you, they didn't want to come here. You beat UCLA one time too.
Yes.
Okay, now we want to go back and talk about first your mom and then your dad. But what your mom did in World War II here at Evansville.
My mom primarily took care of my sister and I. Prior to that, she was born in 42, and I was born at the end of the war. So she was a homemaker. My dad, though, worked on the LSTs. I'm not sure exactly what he did, but he was involved with that. And when I was growing up, he knew a bunch of, back then we called them midgets, and I had little people. And I asked him, how come you know all these people? And he said, well, they use them to crawl into the LSTs to get into the tight spots.
Wow.
And then
So
he was an auctioneer then later on at Evansville.
Yeah. Well, our LSTs, just for a review, 167 made in Evansville. There were 19 different plants in the United States. We made more than anybody else in the United States, and there's one LST functioning in the world left today, and it's right here in Evansville. And there were 7,000 ships at D-Day in Normandy, and there's only one left floating, and that's one here in Evansville.
Right.
Your dad worked there, 19,000 employees, and so he must have been a busy guy.
Right, yeah.
Tell us what your mom did in World War II.
As I said, just took care of the kids. She was a telephone operator, so it was the homemaker and worker. So.
Well, good. There's a big influence, World War II in Evansville. We were the highest per capita working population for the war effort in the world.
Oh, yeah, I've read quite a number of different books about that. Yeah, my uncle also, he was a pilot, and he...
Tell us his name, his whole name.
Arthur McGregor.
Your mother's brother.
Yes.
Tell us about him.
He was a pilot, and they built the LSTs, the P-47s here close to the airport, and then he flew them from there and test flew them. Is a story that I always heard.
So we would like to see some of his information. If you have any old information, we do have a guy named Ken Wilson here has the logs of what every one of the 6,200 plus planes did here, and he may have the logs of the test pilots.
Yes, yeah.
He gave it to Willard Library and probably going to give it to us. He's since deceased, but he was a big collector. But after we made the planes, we checked their brakes, checked their magnetics, and checked the accuracy of the guns. And then the test pilot checked them. We only had 2 crashes with test pilots. Then the WASPs, the women, took them to other places. Well, I'm glad you came here today, a native of Evansville. Let's talk to your wife for a minute. Now, introduce yourself and where you went to school, Miss Minton.
Yes, I'm Linda Minton, and I graduated from Ball State with an education degree at elementary ed. I lived in Indianapolis most of my life, and became interested in World War II with my mother was the youngest of 10. So she was a teenager during the war, and she had 4 brothers that were in the war. 2 of them were home stateside, and the other two, one was in the Pacific, and the other one was in Germany and was actually a POW, was captured.
So you really have firsthand experience with moms with 10 siblings, and then she had 4 really in the military. That's a big deal. So Linda has since written a bunch of books about people's experiences and document things while they're still living, and has multiple books out. Can you tell us about the books and what inspired you to do those books, Linda?
Yes, the first book I wrote and published was World War II Heroes. And I would, as I said, I started collecting my families, just thinking I would do my family's history. And then as people knew what I was doing, they'd say, well, I have an uncle, I have a brother, I have a cousin, until I had 4 binders of stories and photographs. And some of those were because Dr. Browning knew what I was doing and introduced me to some people that helped help fill up my book. So I ended up with 65 stories, and many blessings from these stories and these wonderful men. And as I would talk to them, they said, well, I didn't do anything special. I was just doing my job. So that
They didn't think it was very important, many of these.
right. When I talked to the veterans, I referred to them as heroes, and they said, oh no, we were not heroes. We were just doing our jobs, what we were expected to do. And many of these guys were 17, 18, 19 years old, and had not had many experiences. My one uncle that was a POW said that they had to do a march during this time, and many of the guys were what he's, in his words, city boys, whereas he had lived on a farm all his life, and he was able to withstand a lot of this from the different things that he experienced being a prisoner of war. He did come home and was ill and had tuberculosis, but he recovered and lived a good life.
Some sergeants in World War II would say, I will take one country boy over 50 city boys. Partly because the country boys knew how to improvise, things broke, they knew how to work, and the city boys, a lot of times things break and they get a new one, they don't fix things. So there's a lot of truth to that, and the farm boys also knew how to hunt, knew how to shoot already as a young child.
Exactly, and he walked, well, they didn't have a car, so any place he wanted to go, he had to walk.
Yeah.
So he was used to this long walk that they had to do, whereas unfortunately, if some of the city boys would complain about it, and they would just shoot him.
Yes. So what we're at September 4th, 2022. There's 125,000 living World War II veterans now. We had 16 million of them, so that's a small percentage. So what Linda has done is captured a very important element of our civilization. If you think about it, the Chinese had a printing press back in the 300s or 400s, then the Gutenberg in 1400, but there's so many people's lives that pass and we don't write about them. We don't tell the next generations their stories. So she's captured many stories of veterans, and we can't thank her enough for doing that. She was inspired by her mother and her family, 4 aunts and uncles, or 4 uncles that were in World War II, but she's gone beyond and above. She's made it, her books will be cherished because families, 3 and 4 generations, there's usually nothing written about what somebody did. And most of these veterans, up till in their 80s, they don't even like to talk about it. It's hard to pull it out. What was your technique on pulling this information out of them, Linda? Because a lot of them wouldn't want to talk.
Well, I think they were more comfortable talking to me because I wasn't their family. And many of them, I felt like, were getting toward the end of their life, and they wanted other people to know about it. So that was my thought on it. But they basically just told what happened, the battles, in contrasting to when I talked to the women, which was my second book, and they told more about what things were like, how they felt, the circumstances of that. So I did have 50 women that I did after the men's book.
Yeah, and it's important. The women are the supporting factor. Daycares, a lot of things developed during World War II because the men were gone, the women were working.
Exactly.
And about how many veterans have you interviewed in your books, your multiple books?
So about, be about 110, 115,
Mostly from Indiana?
mostly Midwest.
Uh-huh.
In the women's book, I was able to go to California and talk to some ladies there, so I got some different views about that. They were working on the airplane factories in that area. Some Rosies, mini Rosie,
Yeah.
who went to the Riveter factory in Richmond, California. So contrasting them with the Rosies here in Evansville, which Evansville was quite a war-producing capital at that time, where they were able to convert much of their manufacturing to war supplies. So it was an amazing place during that time.
Can I add that when we were traveling, we'd be at an airport and you'd look over and there's a gentleman with this hat, you know, that where he served, and I look around and there was Linda over there,
Yeah.
you know, and the same thing. And many times they were married to women who were involved also.
Yeah.
And then I need to mention my two other uncles. I had one uncle who was in China and had the privilege of meeting Chiang Kai-shek and his wife. And the story he always told me, he says, they'd have been a lot better off had she been in charge. And he was really, really impressed. And then
So he was in the hump. He was at the hump
Yeah.
in China. We will
Yes.
take you to our map here in a minute, show you we have 3 individuals here that served at the hump.
Yeah, his name was Arthur McGregor.
Uh-huh.
Or excuse me, Herman McGregor.
Herman McGregor.
Yeah, his brother was a pilot, Arthur McGregor. Sorry about that. And then my uncle Charles McDonald, he was in the Pacific and did that kind of thing. So he had an entirely different story with all the bloody and all that, and was just didn't want to talk a whole lot about what it was from all the things that he'd seen.
He would probably been in Iwo Jima, possibly
Right,
Philippines, Okinawa, some of the real tough
Right,
battles.
yes.
Yeah, it was. We just, a man, he was 97, his name was Richard Collodi, he talked to us last week, and Linda, you've talked to him, he's a very good talker.
Oh, yeah.
He was in the Solomon Islands, and he talked about that, and we videoed him yesterday, or Thursday as well, but, you know, he talked about the Solomons and how important they were, but I think we're just lucky to have some of these treasures left, and the next generation needs to really understand what our greatest generation did, and both your parents, all 4 of your parents were in the greatest generation, and these uncles and aunts too. I'm gonna, how about anything else, Dad? Because I want to take you by our picture of the hump. We're now in the Evansville Wartime Museum, and this is our simulator room, the noise. So you've got a Corsair there, and you have a B-25 there. You have Happy Boynton over there, and he was really important over in the Solomon Islands and in the Philippines. You have a P-40 that was before the P-40, P-47s and P-51s, and there's a bunch of P-40s there. This is a simulator room where the kids are learning how to fly, so they learn the technique of flying. So we've got these climb simulators. We have lots of people that come here in the simulator room, over 1,000 since we've been open. But Linda was here during our evolution, so was Mr. Minton. There's a B-17 and a picture of it as well. We had one here 2 years ago. We had 3,000 people that showed up for that. This is our cherished jewel right there. That's our P-47 Hoosier Spirit 2. There's one from World War II up there, and the Hoosier Spirit 2, that's done by Jan Humphrey. That's a mural, so we're lucky to have that.